Morning, everybody. My name is Joy Schwartz. I'm with the Winnefox Library System, and I am joined this morning by my co-host, Lori Freund. She's with the Bridges Library System. Let's see what else I needed to tell you about. That's fine. Connie is getting ready to share her screen. That's cool. Excellent. You should be seeing the first slide from the panelists. Let's see, and in just a moment when the panelists begin, they'll introduce themselves. Your microphone and webcam are not needed this morning during this presentation. They are turned off to just help the panelists give their presentation, and feel free to use the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar to send questions, and the panelists will be answering questions at the end of the presentation. And even though you may see a chat icon on your toolbar, it is not enabled for this session, so just use the Q&A. Let's see, I think that's everything I have to tell you. I should just let the panelists start in. So I will turn off my mic and my webcam and let you begin.
Excellent. Thank you, Joy. And thank you all for joining us this morning for this webinar on positioning the library for a post-pandemic sustainable future. The Wisconsin Library Association's Library Development and Legislation Committee has a smaller group that deals with county and municipal funding issues. And we put together this webinar for you to help, because we see the need and the worry and the concern that's out there in the library community, and we were asked to put together this webinar for you. And since that is one of our goals or our organizational purposes, we decided to attempt to help you. So without further ado, we will be moving through a slideshow, and we will do questions at the end. So please feel free to enter your questions, and we'll attempt to answer those at the end. So what to expect this morning: there will be an archived recording of this webinar on the WLA website, and we will focus on general issues, avoiding identifying particular municipalities or communities. We did ask for questions in advance, and we thank you for sending those questions in, and where it was possible, we removed particular municipalities or references. So we'll be talking in general ways, assuming that what is an issue for some may be an issue for many other people. For simplicity, we will use the word municipal, and that will include counties when the libraries are consolidated. Typically, your municipality is your city or village, but in certain circumstances, it could be a consolidated county or a joint library situation, which is multiple municipalities. And to respect others' time, if you have issues that require more specific advice or are very unique, please contact your library system director, who may invite members of our panel, our LD&L group, into a problem-solving conversation so that we can help assist your individual needs. So what does LD&L do? We're the legislative arm of the Wisconsin Library Association. We recommend legislative policies and agendas to the WLA Board of Directors. They have the ultimate authority, but we speak. We're the voice of WLA on matters of legislative policy. That's our purpose. That's why we meet regularly, to discuss those items. And we do have a number of other purposes but they all relate to legislative policy. So we plan and organize the annual Library Legislative Day, which we hope you will attend in the future, because we do think that the Library Legislative Day is just a fabulous relationship building opportunity. So we encourage you all to attend if at all possible, and bring your trustees and staff. The more people that are engaged in advocacy, the stronger our relationships are. We recommend annual legislative agenda and positions on specific issues that come before the Wisconsin Library Association Board. We facilitate meetings between library stakeholders and state and local officials to help accomplish legislative goals. That can range from just getting involved in a local situation to making the budget request. So the state biennial budget request, we work really hard on. That's one of our biggest lifts, where we meet with legislators to share with them why they should support the Wisconsin Library Association's budget request every 2 years in the state's biennial budget. We host programs at the WLA conferences. We host other programs like this one this morning. We were asked to help. We felt that this is such a special time and such a special need that it was really important that we assist, if at all possible, by helping people understand some of the issues that are related to the legislative policy and the financial issues that we know that you will be facing. So I'd like to introduce myself to you. My name is Connie Meyer. I am the LD&L co-chair, and I am the recently retired director of the Municipal Library System. And I would like each panelist to introduce themselves, but before I do that, I'd like to say a special thank you to Kathy Klager for putting together the majority of this webinar. She did the lion's share of the work. She put together the slide presentation, and she organized everybody. So thank you so much, Kathy, for your work. And then also I'd like to add that you'll see that there are a number of us who are retired, and a couple of us who are not yet retired. So we fully acknowledge that the retired folks among us are not in the middle of this pandemic, and we have great respect and admiration for those of you who are. And so just know that we feel your pain from afar. We've been keeping in touch as much as we can, and that's the reason that we agreed to put this webinar together, is because we know that you have such a full plate, and if there's any way that we can help, we wanted to do that. So without further ado, please each panelist introduce yourself.
Great. Thanks, Connie. I'm Kathy Klager, and really the reason that I did most of this is that I am chair of the committee that works on county and municipal funding. So it was my job. I'm happy to do it. I'm also co-chair with Connie of LD&L this year, and I retired last April as director of the Pauline Haas Public Library in Sussex. And I would like to acknowledge Chris Adams-Wendt, Chris really helped me a lot with this.
Thanks, Kathy. And you did 95% of the work. I'm Chris Adams-Wendt. I was formerly the director of the Rhinelander District Library before joining the Wisconsin Valley Library Service staff, and I am now semi-retired as a public library consultant specializing in advocacy matters and legislative liaison. So let me forward you to Mark Arend.
Yes, hi, I am Mark Arend, and my video doesn't work, so you're not seeing me actually today. But I retired last fall from Winnefox Library System, and part of my job was working with our directors in each of our counties as they put together the county funding request, and basically on working with county, I've lost the word, I apologize. Move on to the next one, Pete.
Hi, I'm Peter Leffel. I am the director of the Wauwatosa Public Library and an LD&L member.
Good morning. I'm Mark Ibaugh. I am the Consulting Services Coordinator at South Central Library System and a past member of LD&L. I do work with our libraries on adjacent county reimbursement, budget questions, those sorts of things. Steve Conway is next.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Steve Conway. I have the honor of working with WLA on all of your government relations activities. So that involves a lot of the state, the governor's office, agencies that we work with, various agencies, DPI on those. And then as you see, we had some different issues with counties. And so we've actually created this group. And so we're involved with county things. So my job is really just to help and to provide advice and guide us through a lot of the different budgetary type things or any issues that come up for WLA. And it's an honor working with this group. They're very dedicated, even though they put this retired tag on there, they're not retired. They work just as hard as they did before. So I'm very appreciative to work with all of them. So back to you, Connie.
Thank you, Steve. Take it away, Kathy. Now I don't see Kathy, so I'm going to take this slide.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, there
I'm
she is.
back.
Okay.
I'm back. I'm sorry, my mute was on.
No
So what
worries.
we've learned is obviously not how to do these elegantly. At least I haven't, but you know, we'll get better. So what we have learned both in our careers and especially in our legislative work and with working with Steve is a number of things. And I'm going to run through them really quickly because they are going to form the backbone of what we're talking about today. And some of us will address them in more detail, and then we'll apply them to the questions and concerns that you had. So the first one is just playing the long game, understanding that it's not just about what's happening today, but your future. Understand before being understood. Unintended consequences abound. We are stronger together, whether that's within our libraries, our systems, our municipalities, our counties, or statewide. Even nationally, with libraries especially, we're stronger together, and as a nation we are. Library stories are key. Data is best used to supplement your stories. Keep it short and simple. This is a Steve, and Steve thinks we shouldn't have more than 3 or 4 bullet points. So you can see I've failed, and look, there's more. If you want to show us the next screen, Connie. We've learned that being adaptable is advantageous. It's also necessary. We've learned to stay optimistic and positive most of the time, and certainly in public. We've learned that library boards are key to think creatively and to share ideas. And I think the library community has been just doing a great job of this during this crisis. To never assume bad intentions. It's so easy to do that, and so often you're wrong about that. We've learned that people like to be thanked. Think about yourself. And we've learned that relationships are crucial. And they're so crucial, in fact, that Steve is going to talk about them next in more detail.
All right, everybody. So I'd like to start with a quote because I use this in a lot of my different presentations, but it really fits in here today. And it's basically of a known. We know what we know. And so that's, you know, data that we know. And we also know there's things we don't know, right? There's things I don't know how to perform surgery. You know, most of us say we know surgery exists, but we don't know how to do it. But there's this third category of unknown of unknown. And that's kind of like where we basically don't even have a clue. We don't even know, we don't know. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of it is going on right now. And what happens with that is there's a fear of the unknown. And so what's happening now with this pandemic, we've not been through this before. It's not like you have a database of information you use. Oh, I did this in the past. Here's what I do now, all those different things. So we're faced with this whole new reality of what's next. What am I going to do? What's going to happen? And so what you have to know is you're not alone. So you're experiencing it, but also every relationship that you're working with is experiencing the exact same thing. At the county level, the state level, the city level, they're all looking at this right now, wondering, okay, what's next? What is this unknown that we're going to be working with? So what we're going to be asking you to do today is basically to be the leader in your community. This is your chance. Some people see this as a scary thing. We actually see this as an opportunity. So this is an opportunity that we as librarians can now help our communities. There's things we can do. So we're going to give you ideas here today on the relationships you need to have, you should be looking at, but also we're going to give you ideas of solutions to bring to those relationships. So it's kind of a two thing going on. Now, this may move you outside of some of your comfort zones. And I understand that. And pretty much every panelist on here will understand when I started working with everyone here today, there were some comfort zones that they had. And what happened is their purpose was stronger than any fear or of comfort zone moving out of. And their purpose led them to try new things and move out. And so sometimes we have relationships that are only, let's say we could have more, right? There's things we could do, but we're either afraid to do it or it's not in my comfort zone, different things. So right now, we're gonna be asking you here today is to kind of just forget your comfort zone. Think of the purpose that you have for you, your libraries, your communities, and we're going to ask you to kind of move outside those comfort zone and do some things that way. So right now, I'm sure most of you have taken inventory of the relationships that you're going to need right now. right? When you're moving out of this pandemic, who do I need to talk to? Where at the city, the municipalities, all these different things, county level. And you're kind of taking this assessment and you're looking at it right now as like, okay, is this strong? Do I know this person? Are they just someone I know who they are? Or is it where I basically have their cell phone number in my favorites? Not just you have it, it's in your favorites because you talk to them a lot. So that's a key thing we're going to be working on. And so what we're going to be asking you to do is look at these relationships, do an assessment of them, and then we're going to help you to make them stronger. And we're going to give you ideas what you can do and solutions you can bring for that today. That's what it's going to be about. And you have to understand, WLA was in this position a few years ago. We were looking at the exact same thing. We had a lot of stuff going on. If you remember, the budgets for the state funding was cut. A lot of stuff going on. And so what we did was we went in under the leadership of your executive director, Bloomer Lovelace, does a wonderful job, and also the entire LD&L committee decided we're going to go back and we're going to start with this foundation of relationships. We needed to have strong relationships in order to help us with all the different action steps that we wanted to do that would help all the libraries. So it wasn't easy. Again, we had to do a lot of different things, but the results from that work, and it's been 6 years of work, continued work, that we now have very positive relationships. And if you look up in here, it's long-term. So we were asking for something at the time, but then we also knew that we had to be there when we didn't need something, if that makes sense. Because if you only show up and build a relationship when you need something, that one-way flow, it isn't really a relationship. Then that's just a continual ask. You're not actually building that trust. So there's a consistency that you have to do. So you're looking at this list of all these people you want to work with, but consistently, our consistency means that we're going to work through the pandemic now, but we're also going to ask you to keep working with all these relationships and build them up when you don't need something, when maybe they need something, and there's all the different things you can do there. So that's what we're going to work with that. So we want you right now and to basically, at the end of the program here today, is to write down all the relationships that are necessary for you right now with the pandemic, getting out of this pandemic, all the different things you're going to have to work with. So I want that list there, but I also would like you to make a list of all the relationships in your area. It could be community events, all the different things. You know, all the different social organizations, all the different community organizations. There's a lot of different things you can do that may be outside of just this one issue that you can start building relationships to, because you never know when they're going to come in to help you. So build that list and then do a quick assessment of that list and see where are you? You know, what level of relationship do you have? And then what we want you to do is, based on the information you're going to get here today, and we have some great speakers we're going to bring into right into detail of, you know, one-on-one, here's what we did, here's what we can ask you to do. But develop a game plan. Find a way that, you know, for each relationship, assess what level, how strong it is, and then also how are they going to help you with what the things you want to work with to get out of the pandemic that we're working with, and then how can you increase your relationship with them? And then the next thing you want to do is, again, we're going to talk about solution oriented. So if you come up with just problems, they're going to give you the solution, and it may not be the solution you want. But again, they're in the same boat that you are right now. They're in unknowns of unknowns. They're trying to do the best they can. They're gathering the data they have. They're going to make decisions. So if you actually can provide to them positive solution-based options for them, the chances of you getting that taken in when there's this, I don't want to call it chaos, but all this stuff swirling around, if you have solutions, you're going to get a better chance of getting what you want. If you just bring up problems, or if worse, do nothing, right? If you just sit in your library and just wait for whatever is going to happen, and then react to that, I think that's the worst you could do. You really need, because then you're just going to get what they decide for you. So this way is look at the relationships, see what, you know, start making your meetings, see when you can start meeting with them, discussing it. But when you go, make sure that you have a very solution-oriented concept for them. And the other thing is we're going to talk a lot about is your communication with them. And so, and this is easy for you. This is you're actually my easiest group to work with this, because you guys are so caring, you're so honest, you're just so trustworthy that your communication is always positive. It is always there. But there are some times when you're under stress, right? And all these different things going on, and there may be some negativity, and they may, you know, there may be a fear they're going to do all these cuts and all these different things. So there could be an opportunity for the communication not to be as positive as you normally are. So always take a step back and just make sure that every tone, everything that you're giving, every communication is positive and solution oriented. And that will help us with that. And then what we want you to know is really we're here for you. So I think that's a key thing for today too. This is a very special committee that was actually set up for Cross County. And just so you understand, for example, what they're going to ask you to do today, because they're not just talking the talk, they've already walked the walk on this one. We had different issues with counties. And rather than just having this, what we call whack-a-mole, where this thing just kept popping up on us, we decided to change that. And so we contacted the county association. And then so this group, led by Connie and Kathy Pletcher was part of this too when she was co-chair, and all the members of this group here have put in countless hours of going out and building relationships with the county association and the various county members. So, and we did this when we didn't have an issue, right? So we had the issue we worked with, but we also continued this relationship and kept building it when we actually did not have an issue or asked for them. So when you're looking at everything today, they're going to ask you to do all these different steps. So I ask you to please follow them. And then my last request on my time period here today too is a plug. So I'm going to ask you for coming in February when we do our legislative day down in Madison. This is where we show our love to all the legislators. So if you could come to that day and bring your trustees, bring everyone to it, it really does make a difference for you to come down and participate with us. And the other thing we're going to ask you for this summer is you may see me out a lot. This is my time where there's nothing to ask of legislators, so I'm out knocking on doors. I'm out doing all kinds of activities to build goodwill and trust with them in relationships. But they also have a lot of debates. There's a lot of stuff happening in the political world that if you could host those in your city, in your libraries and all this stuff, this would help us, again, building our relationship with legislators. So that's my section. So I'll turn it back to you, Kathy.
Okay, and I'm up next. Let's talk about the importance of understanding and influence. Relationships are built on trust and mutual understanding, and they are essential to influence. The ability to influence should not be confused with power, control, or manipulating others to get your way. To influence is to have an impact on the behaviors, attitudes, opinions, and choices of others. It's about noticing what motivates those who control your library's purse strings and using that knowledge to leverage positive results. Seek to understand the needs and motivations and values of those who will sit across the table from you at budget time. By showing a sincere interest in their commitment to what matters to someone like you and your commitment to someone like them, you'll begin to build greater influence with them as they realize your actions include a genuine concern for their interests. Your ability to influence others is based on trust and expands in proportion to the amount of trust that exists in your relationship. Understanding and appreciating the difficult choices that local and state officials must make doesn't signal that you're some kind of a pushover, but it contributes to respectful and more successful conversations. One simple way to show that you share your municipal officers' interests is to talk about the benefits to community instead of the needs of the library. It's just a simple rephrasing from "our circulation staff deserves to earn a living wage" to "our residents are best served when our frontline staff members are skilled and creative. We find that attracting and retaining such people is increasingly difficult at the low wages that we're currently paying." It's the same message, but one is about the library and the other is about the residents of your community. In a few minutes, Pete will be providing an overview about potential reductions to various types of revenue and their potential impact upon municipal budgets. And so I will turn it over.
And that's my turn, I guess. And I want to talk about stories. And this is very important in building that relationship and in trying to influence those decision makers, the elected officials. data, we give them the numbers. We checked out this many items. We have this many people registered, have library cards, and that's useful and that's helpful. But it doesn't motivate people. They look at the data, okay, yeah. Stories are what catches their attention. You have a story about, or better yet, you have the actual person talk about how did the library, or how did that help me improve my life? How did that library, working with the staff, or the staff helped me and I got my GED, or I was able to go to college because of them, or they helped me when I was struggling starting a business. These stories are what sticks in the hearts and the minds. So you want to use those stories, and you want the stories to try to match the interest of the audience. So if you have if you have someone on your village board who's very interested in childhood education or literacy, and if you can bring some stories forward that speaks to that. Someone saying, hey, working with the library, I learned to read. Or a parent saying, the library really helped my kid when she was struggling learning how to read, and the library has that Read to a Dog program, and that really helps. That's the sort of thing that sticks in the mind and the heart. And then that data, those numbers, can sort of expand on that. You can say, here's one person's story, and there are a dozen others that could tell the same story. Can you flip the next slide, please? Keep it simple and short. If you have people talking for you or speaking for you, if you're doing it, don't try to make the story more complicated than it needs to be. Keep it as simple as possible. Long stories or too many stories can be confusing and even irritating. I've often told library directors that I've worked with, when you sit down, you want them thinking, I would have liked to have heard a little bit more. You do not want them thinking, I thought they'd never shut up. So keep it short, 3 or 4 points to your presentation, or to your 3 or 4 good stories, and get up and say it, and then sit down, and that shows that you respect their time. And introducing unnecessary information can lead to, who's next?
Me. Unintended consequences.
It leads to Connie.
Yep. And I love talking about this because I've done this more times than I can even imagine or begin to describe. So when you're making a statement, when you're providing information, look, we're all librarians, so it's what we do, we provide information. We're going to give a deep level of detail to our library board. That's as it should be. They're making those decisions about the library. They need that detail. You want to share as much as you can, although you still have to position it. But when you're talking to a legislator, they're big picture, they're high level, they don't need all that detail. And if you get in the weeds, you get in trouble. And I can say that has happened to me more times, as I said, than I can count. And I just have this Steve talking in my ear, and I just kind of remember that. Don't get into the weeds, stay high level. So when you're having a conversation about the fact that the library was closed and your circulation has been decreased, you don't have to go into the gritty detail. In fact, everything that you say, you think carefully about before you say it, because the minute you get into the detail, then there are questions. You don't want to open up that door for those questions, because you can get derailed if you get too far into the weeds. Now, you will have to remember, you have to be respectful, transparent, answer questions if they come, but don't bring those questions to the table. Try to keep it high level. There are unintended consequences. So if you think that there is a solution out there, and there's this great solution for you that would require your legislator or your city council person or your county board supervisor, someone in a position of power to make change, your perfect solution might be somebody else's biggest problem. And that's an unintended consequence that we don't want to see. We care about the libraries for the citizens of Wisconsin. Every one of you cares about libraries for all of the people in the state of Wisconsin. I know you do. It's why you're doing what you're doing. We believe in what libraries mean for people, but the people of Wisconsin who deserve to have quality library services. So we always have to be mindful of that we're not just thinking about one little facet of libraries in the state. We think about the big picture. At the end of the day, when you start thinking about the statute, we all know it's not perfect. We all know that county funding is very far from perfect. But by the same token, libraries were changed fundamentally when Act 150 was passed and provided county funding for in-county reimbursement, and then changed again, especially for those libraries who live on borders, with Act 420 when it required cross-county reimbursement. So those two statutes fundamentally changed the world for many of the libraries in the state of Wisconsin. And we know they're not perfect. They pay 70% reimbursement. So the municipalities are subsidizing the remaining 30 in certain instances. What we wish to do, or we hope to do, is improve that, not make that go away. So when you start opening up the statute to fix something, sometimes you can have unintended consequences. It is a little bit like a Pandora's box. So we want to be very careful and thoughtful about how we fix it, with being careful about timing, being careful about, well, understanding the position from a variety of viewpoints. So we really encourage people to avoid citing statutes altogether. So, you know, you all that have been around for a while will remember that we had the maintenance of effort statute. So there was a statute that said that municipalities couldn't reduce the funding of a library lower than the average of the previous 3 years. That was in statute for a long time, and it was very protective. And people would talk about that, and talked about it enough that legislators understood that that was there, and municipalities didn't like necessarily the fact that that was there. And then lo and behold, it disappeared in one budget session as a surprise to everybody, because it came in not through a normal legislative process, but as a part of a budget where they can make changes to statutes. So that happened. And so that's why it's really important for us to avoid citing statutes altogether, because we never want it to seem that they can't do this because of this law, because then that gives them incentive to change that law. What we would rather have them understand the right thing to do, the fair thing to do, the responsible thing to do, because legislators care. That's why they're doing what they're doing. They care about doing the right thing for the people that they represent. We know that. And so we will always want to appeal to their nature to provide the best possible services for their community that can make a positive difference. So we always try to position it that way, as opposed to citing statutes. With that said, sometimes having the statute there and knowing that it exists to support you is important. So we would say that rather than you citing the statute, you engaged your library system director. That piece of it's really important. We're set up in Wisconsin with a structure that allows you to have that backup, that support from your library system, so they can come in and help you. And in many ways, that perhaps they can be the bad guy, and then you're not the bad guy, somebody else is the bad guy. so we can think carefully about how we structure that. So please ask for help if you get into that kind of a situation. The help exists. Your library system director is there, and your library system director can engage with us. We don't have a magic wand, but we do have relationships, and that does help. So the next one is Mark's. Is that right? No, this is still me. Sorry. We work in concert on the big issues, and we have a better chance of success. That part's really true. Is rather than one individual person tackling their own problem, we have a much better chance of success if we are all in concert. We're all united. We have one voice. We are doing this for the right reasons. We have a much better chance of success. That's why Legislative Day is, I think, so important, because we talk about our message. We go in and we all say the same thing. We're united. They know that we have thought carefully about our message and why we are saying what we're saying and why we're asking for what we're asking for. If funding is insufficient, it's better if we aren't saying, change this law so it helps our own library. Instead of that, let's talk about growing the pie so that we all benefit. There are a couple components to county funding, and we tend to think about the distribution part, which is how much money does my library get? But we forget about the collection part of the formula sometimes, and I think that's the part where we talk about how much are we going to ask for? Is there a way that we can grow the pie? Is there a way we can encourage the people who are making those decisions to think about what their return on investment is if we can grow the pie?
Okay, this is Mark. So we're going to talk a little bit about playing the long game, and Steve mentioned that and talked about it. The past several months have definitely confirmed that these are unprecedented times that we are in. Unfortunately, one consequence of these times and what libraries and municipalities are going through could very well be negative fiscal impact for municipal and counties. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. We don't know the depth of it, but we anticipate that there will be some negative fiscal impact. In light of that potential, knowing that something could be coming, it's very important for libraries to try and stay focused on your library's long-term goals. This really is a marathon. It's important to continue to nurture your existing relationships and also take stock and time to try and explore and develop new relationships within your community. Steve did talk about that also. As we think about getting back to normal, normal may look very different than what we are familiar with. So it is very important that you and your board remain actively involved in library advocacy and try to continue and identify opportunities to build new relationships. We're going to talk a little more about that a little later in the webinar. If you can go to slide 15. As we think about dealing with this stuff, remember that people like to be thanked. People need to be thanked. So while dealing with these ongoing challenges, we really encourage you to try and stay positive and avoid complaining about the impact of potential cuts on your library. That doesn't mean that you don't talk about the cuts. That doesn't mean that you don't give information about the impact, about how it affects people in the community. But you need to try to stay positive and very professional. You don't want to play the victim. State your case professionally, and then understand that responses to your message are never personal. Your municipal boards, county boards are making very difficult decisions, and they're juggling lots of different things. And so when they make decisions that are not in your best interest, it's not personal. Regardless of the budget outcome for your library, it is important to express appreciation to your funding authority for the consideration they gave your budgetary request, for the questions they asked, for the reasoning that you put into it, and also for considering the needs of residents. it is important to say thank you, and because you have to go back to them in the future, and maintaining that relationship is critical. And again, it is a long game. It's a long-term process, so you want to maintain those relationships.
So we asked for questions in advance of the webinar, and thank you to everybody who sent in questions or concerns. We consolidated those and have listed some of the areas of concern. Of course, there's the concern of reductions in municipal appropriations. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail in a few minutes. There are, of course, concerns about reduction in county payments, both inside the county and adjacent county. Counties are impacted differently by the pandemic. We know that. So, and it's not one size fits all. Some people are more concerned than others because of the way their funding is structured. There is concern about reductions in federal funding, obviously, and system grants, as library systems are sort of also in an interesting situation. They're funded by state dollars. So there is concern that there could be a change in system grants as well, or just system aid in general. So those are all areas of concern. And we recognize that. And then we also heard that how the library is viewed and would be treated in comparison to other departments, and then how to advocate for the library within your own community. And then we heard that there is a struggle with how actually would you implement budget cuts if you were asked to do that. Some of you may be asked to do that. I'm fairly certain that you may be asked to do that. So how do you best go about doing that? And then what about reduction in state aid to systems? What does that mean? So there's a lot of uncertainty, and we don't, as I said, we don't have a magic wand, but we want to walk through a few of those areas of concern for you this morning. So Pete.
Okay, so hi, I'm Pete Leffel. I'm here to talk about municipal appropriations. If you're like me, as a director of a library, 90% of my time over the last 3 months has been spent thinking about the well-being of my staff and how can I plan, prepare, and implement library services for the public in a manner that's appropriate and safe for both the public and my staff. It's been an incredible amount of work, and we're all doing it in stages. At the same time, we've been working to try to keep paths of communication open with our library board, the community, and our municipal governing bodies and officials to make sure that they understand the appropriateness and the importance of libraries. At the same time, in the back of our heads, we're all certainly thinking about funding levels. If your library, once again, is like mine, you get a little bit of funding from your library's services. You get some funding from serving non-resident library users. Some libraries, it's more significant than others. And the bulk of your funding comes from your municipal governing body. And the questions that we've received for this webinar are the same questions that you've had and the same questions that I have. And that's namely, how can I keep my municipality from cutting the library budget? How can I make the municipality see the value of my library? And what if I've been told the library budget will be cut more than other departments? We can go to the next slide. These questions are all based on what Mark and Connie and Chris and Steve have said before in terms of the importance of the library. It's all about relationships are critical. It's these thought clouds that Kathy made up. If you keep these thoughts in mind, they help push the ideas of what the importance of your library is. The two key points here is your library board is key and relationships are crucial. In terms of the value of library services, it's the communications you give to the community, the communications you give to the library board, it's the communications that you give to your city officials. Library boards in the past have always been important in helping get funding levels from the municipalities and for advocating that. It's more important now than ever before to have them involved in this process. To that end, we can go to the next slide. The best thing that library directors can do, if you haven't done this already, is, from a municipal standpoint, is to get in the heads of what your municipal finance director is thinking in terms of the budget. Every library's situation is going to be different based on their setup, their municipality, the relationships that we've had with our municipal governing bodies. So there's too many variables to say, hey, for sure, this is what's going to happen and this is how you're going to handle it. So what's important for directors to do is to meet with your library board. Ideally, your library board president and yourself will meet with your city's finance director and city administrator, or whatever position you have at your municipality, to talk through the various aspects of how this last crisis is going to be impacting the municipal budgets, either for 2020 and 2021 and 2022. So we have some bullet points of what you want to go through. So we're going to go through those. At your next ideally what you're going to do is you're going to go and have a meeting with your finance director and your library board president. And then if you haven't done this already, at a library board meeting, your next library board meeting, go through all of these steps with your library board and let your library board be aware of the position that your municipality is going to be in. This will help your library board be much more effective in advocating for your municipal support, because your library board will come in as knowledgeable about what your city's current situation is. So let's go through some of these options. So property taxes. Property tax collections are the largest source of income for Wisconsin cities and villages. While cities and villages depend heavily on property taxes, the degree of reliance does vary wildly. You'll want to know what your municipal financial officials believe are going to be the impacts from property taxes. The good news for libraries and for municipal governance is that the property tax levies that are set later this year for taxes that are going to be billed in December of 2020 and collected in 2021 are going to be based on valuations as of January 1st, 2020. What that means is the valuations for properties are already set in determining what the rates are going to be for the next budget. So the impacts of the diminished values will not be reflected until 2022 budgets are adopted. Now, to be clear, your municipality's values for properties could significantly go down, or maybe not significantly, but in any case, if they do decline, policymakers do have the option to offset any decline in property values by raising the property tax rates. Because the state imposed property tax levy limits are linked to the levy amount, there is no technical impediment or legal impediment preventing them from raising the rates to ensure that they're receiving the same amount of property tax levy from year to year. However, depending on your municipality, a lot of government officials might be wary of raising property tax rates to offset those lost in values, even if they are able to do so within levy limits. For delinquent property tax payments, many governments received only a portion of their property taxes that they owed for 2020, and they may have some difficulty collecting some unpaid amounts in the upcoming year throughout this year. For this year, interest and penalties are waived for municipal property tax payments for payments after April 30th until some point later this year, which is going to impact anticipated revenue. You will want to check with your finance director for your municipality to see what is the anticipated loss from those penalties and fees that they normally would have collected, because each year a municipality will typically budget a certain amount of interest and penalties that they will collect, and that is going to be a loss of revenue for those municipalities this year. Reduced growth is going to be an impact, not necessarily right away, but certainly will be in the future years, possibly, because a recession will likely slow new development in most communities. That in turn will restrain the ability of local officials to raise levies, because the state, assuming the state continues to levy limits to net new construction. Charges for services. You'll want to make sure you're on the same page. Your library board understands where your municipality is with charges for services. Charges for services are typically the third largest source of general revenues for municipalities, behind property taxes and state aids. The good news for municipalities is that the largest areas of fee-based services that municipalities receive are typically pretty stable. Garbage collection is one of them, sewage is another. Those tend to be more or less level no matter what the situation is. Ambulance transport is the third largest area. In my particular municipality, they're already seeing a 20% reduction in ambulance transport due to the reduction of elective services over the last 3 months. The other challenge for municipalities is going to be the ability to collect fees from individuals if they are not able to pay such fees. Other things to consider for charges for services: for areas that heavily rely on tourism, especially those in those special designated zones, those fees can comprise a significant amount of those municipalities' budget. So a reduction in tourism could have a significant impact on municipal budgets. For fines, forfeitures, license and permits, the revenues collected from fines and forfeitures typically account for a small percentage of village and municipal revenues, but license and permitting can be a little bit more significant. With fines and forfeitures, the vast majority are derived from fines paid for municipal code and ordinance violations. In my particular city, they are they're anticipating a significant loss in revenue from parking and speeding tickets, for instance. Building permits, inspections, and as well as business and occupation licenses related to activities like selling alcohol will also be impacted. Room and resort tax. Tax collections from tourism will obviously stand to suffer. Local sales taxes from the premier resort areas will be decreased. And in our particular municipality, so you want to check with your municipality because this is all great background information to have. In my particular municipality, depending on when your room taxes were implemented, in our case, it was before 1994, for different rules apply, depends on when your municipality implemented room taxes. Our municipality keeps the first third of revenue from room taxes, and then the other 2/3 goes on to the Tourism Commission. In our case, it looks like our municipality might not be able to hit their first third revenue, which will have an impact on both our Tourism Commission and also for locally. For proprietary funds, such as utility fees, these are for the operations that are more like businesses. Think typically water and sewer. These are mostly relatively stable, but some areas could take to a moderate to a substantial hit, depending on what the level of industrial use is for your municipality. If your municipality relies heavily on industrial or commercial use that was significantly reduced, that could reduce the utility fees that went to the proprietary funds. In addition, the Public Service Commission offered deferred payment agreements to customers, and they agreed not to charge interest and penalties, which can impact the cash flow for municipal-owned water utilities. Other revenues from proprietary funds could be impacted, such as public charges for parking lots, ramps, and meters. Municipalities that have significant parking meter revenue in their downtown areas will look at it for a significant loss of revenue. For state aids, state aids is the second typical large source of revenue income for municipalities. More than half of state aids are from the state's shared revenue program, which is a form of aid provided to local governments. There's also state highway and road aids and intergovernmental aids total. Cities will be concerned that state aid will diminish in the future. State aid levels have been set through the current budget, which extends through June 30th of 2021. However, there is a statute that if revenues fall below a certain percentage of expectation, that the legislator is mandated to do a budget repair bill that goes through the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. It is not yet apparent whether state aids are going to be significantly changed in the future. Two other areas that may not be on these slides, I'm not sure. Sales taxes for county libraries in particular. Sales taxes are a significant source of revenue for counties, so that could impact your municipality's revenue. And then the other thing to ask your municipal finance director is about the interest earnings on available cash and investments. These are things that I've gotten from my finance director on tips of what those interest earnings are going to be and how they're going to potentially impact revenues. So you can go to the next slide now. Going back to these relationships, this bubble cloud, the important thing for your library is to have this discussion with your finance director, sit down, have this discussion with your library board to go over the unique situations that your municipality is going to be facing. What that will do is it'll put you and your library board in a better position to help advocate for funding for your library, because we're all looking at a double whammy of we're looking at potential increased costs for providing adapted services in the future, while at the same time looking at diminishes in our own library's revenue and potential decreases from our municipality. Your library board will be in the best position to advocate during your budget process if they are fully aware of what the impacts for the budget for your city or village is to help plan ahead.
Okay, let's talk about in-county reimbursements under Act 150. We asked our audience to share what you were anxious about, and what you see here are some concerns that were sent in ahead of time relative to Act 150. I'll give you a minute to take a look at that. And then, Connie, if you could switch to the next slide, I'd appreciate it. What we think is that these questions are really asking the following. How can library directors work through their county library planning and budgeting process to take the unusual pandemic year into consideration as counties craft the distribution of available 2021 and 2022 dollars to in-county libraries? The structure of county library planning committees, whether you call it a county library board or whether you're working with a library committee of the county board itself, or how these are structured, as well as the approach of these entities to county library funding and the degree to which local library directors are brought to the table for discussion and decision-making, is not uniform throughout the state. So it's difficult to prescribe a set of do's and don'ts and prescriptions for how to deal with your particular situation, because you will know that best. Successful advocacy before a county finance committee begins with relationships among the library directors in your county. Do you talk to each other? Do you meet regularly? Do you have a common understanding of how your particular library functions within that library network in your county? You also should think about the director's relationships with the citizen and county supervisor members of your county library committee, however that is constructed. We are all stronger together. In the instances where county library committees have invited the librarians to the table, where you are all elbow to elbow or were elbow to elbow and are talking as a committee of the whole, as a unit with common objectives. That's very different from a situation where the library directors might be sitting along the sidelines and only observing what the committee does and only be responding or contributing when asked. So you want to move your county committee to a platform where you're all working in concert as equals, if you can manage that, with your expertise and connections and their experience and connections going hand in hand. The nature of library services in 2020 may have changed because of the pandemic, but their value to all county residents has not changed. Many of the same value statements and examples of creative response to community need during the pandemic that are relevant to local budget conversations you are having with your municipalities will also be useful at the county level. Remember that the 2020 circulation is used in 2021 to invoice counties for payment in 2022. Take the long view as you invest in relationships and seek to better understand and influence county level decisions. And here I'll interject that we are aware that in many counties there are separate agreements between municipal libraries and the county for special types of payments and grants, that some county library boards give their in-county libraries grants over and above the 70% requirement. And there are many different permutations depending upon where you live and how your county is used to handling this. So again, one piece of advice can't fit all, but you need to consider your own situation and relationships. Given the universal nature of reduced access to public facilities and services of all kinds during the pandemic, non-compliance regarding library standards for minimum hours and related criteria should not be a concern at this time. So we'll move to the next one. And that's
So, yeah, so that Chris was talking about Act 150, and the other part of it is Act 420, which is just the extension of that county obligation. So the county has two obligations. They have the obligation for reimbursing municipal libraries for serving those residents who don't have libraries within the county, as well as in the adjacent counties. So there are those two layers. So there's concern about both layers because the libraries are piecing together their funding structure, and oftentimes includes both layers. The questions that we got related to Act 420 were related to how would the 2020 circulation, which will be reduced, affect the libraries' cross-county reimbursements. So, you know, we're talking about the specifics of the formula and the actual numbers. And then what about e-circulations and extended due dates? Those are pieces of the conversation about the formula. Now, e-circulations are not considered circulations as traditional circulation in the statutory formula. As everyone knows, we've had extensive community conversation about this, and they are not considered circulation, and there are very good reasons why they're not considered circulation. And one of the things that we would say is this isn't probably going to change under Act 420, especially across the county border, because e-circulations really are within a library system, but that it's an important piece of the conversation, especially from the storytelling perspective, because while libraries were closed, digital circulation was what we offered, and it was super important to people, and people will remember that. Another concern that we heard is, what if counties don't have enough money to reimburse us, or say they don't, because they can levy for the reimbursement. The reality is they can levy for that, but they may say that they can't because they're very well aware of the limitations they currently face. So just be mindful of the fact that we do have some time. The 2020 circulation, this year's circulation, will be used next year for reimbursement in 2022. That gives us some time to actually, as a library community, think about that. It gives us some time to plan. It gives you time to plan. In terms of county funding, all of you should have a county library plan that's up to date. And I would encourage you to make sure that it is. And if it's not, or even if it is up to date, it could use a bit of a review right now, because this is an unprecedented time and things have changed. There may be things that you can do within your county plan to adequately address the circulation situation that you'll have, where you have reduced number of circulations but not reduced cost, resulting in a very high cost per circulation. So say that happens. You all of a sudden you have a greatly increased cost per circulation. What happens? How do you cope with that? Part of that is having a formula that doesn't necessarily highlight cost per circulation within your own county, because that exacerbates that issue in people's minds. Now, the cost per circulation is what it is, and when you're making a reimbursement request to an adjacent county, it's a part of the statutory formula. So LD&L understands that we do need to have a conversation about this, is if we can, with our existing relationship with the Wisconsin Counties Association, pursue a discussion about what to do about this. There may be some options for dealing with this in a way that is best practice that we can recommend statewide with the support of the Wisconsin Counties Association. We have some time to work on that, and we will have that conversation. So stay tuned for more information about that. know that that's more of a longer term decision. But the way we are successful with that is having those solid relationships. So, you know, the time right now, building those relationships is really important. And I know it's hard in the middle of a pandemic to build those relationships, but your legislators are working really hard to navigate an unprecedented time, just like you are working really hard. And if there's anything that you can do to offer assistance to them or information to them and support of them, that would be very helpful right now. We will give priority to avoiding unintended consequences with whatever we do. So the e-circulation conversation, for example, is that comes to mind in terms of unintended consequences, because if you say, oh, we really want to count e-circulation as circulation, it would reduce our cost per circulation. That's all well and good, but if it reduces your cost per circulation, that could actually result in a reduction of funding for you, which is not the end goal that you want, I'm sure. So we don't want to just arbitrarily say, oh yeah, now we're just going to include e-circulation, because that would be not in the best interest of libraries. So,
and I'm going to jump in here for just a minute and note that we're getting late in the program, so we'll want to move along. And then just to highlight too that the way that we can best avoid unintended consequences with Act 420 is to work together. And so if you run into a situation with a cross-county issue, please contact LD&L.
all right, Mark.
Okay, we want to talk a little bit about concerns about reduction in federal and system grants. For the most part, federal grants flow through the state or systems with very specific project guidelines. You can back up one slide. We'll get to that in a second. They flow through the state and systems, but usually they have very specific project guidelines for use. For example, there are very few grants that can be used to pay general operating expenditures. There have been a couple come out, but most target things like technology or literacy projects that are requiring libraries or systems to do something new and add something that wasn't done before. Having said that, there are a lot of opportunities right now. There's been a lot of stuff coming out, a lot of different grants that are libraries can apply for directly, but you really have to watch closely because stuff is coming out daily. The federal government has released a lot of grants. Some are available directly to libraries. Some go through organizations like the Wisconsin Humanities Council, and they did have a grant that did allow for operating expenditures. The availability of system grants, now this is a different thing, are really up to the discretion of individual systems and are largely determined by the level of state aid that those systems receive. System aid is provided through the state biennial budget process, and as you know, it can increase or decrease depending on the current financial situation in Wisconsin. And even though system aid has been set for the second year of the biennium, it is always possible, depending on how long things go or how bad they get, that the legislature could come back and do a budget repair bill that would impact the second year of the biennium and could impact, in that case, system aid, which could then impact any grants that local systems do offer to libraries. So it is all somewhat fluid. Some systems offer grants, some don't, but it's really up to the system. And there really isn't a formula because there's nothing mandated that they do those things. Next slide. At the federal level, Sherry Michonis, the WLA Federal Relations Coordinator and the ALA Chapter Counselor shared the following. LSTA funds have been earmarked for new grants like the CARES Act, and the CARES Act is one that has provided a lot of new funding, and there are opportunities there for systems and libraries directly. And if you haven't looked at that funding, I mean, there are some deadlines coming up in June. You may want to look at that or talk to your system. Funds in the budget for regular IMLS funding should remain for this year. That is the expectation in the federal budget. We're anticipating that those will remain the same. But having said that, there is no guarantee of future special grants. It's a budget year to budget year thing, and so that's why it's critical to build relationships with your federal legislators, making them aware of the needs in your communities, the impact your library is having in your communities, and the importance of the funding that has been available, and what you have done with it, what your system has done with it. Those are critical things. And as we've talked already, library stories and data can be game changers, especially at the federal level. They get a lot of information and they're inundated with stuff. And so simple stories and simple data can go a long way to making your case when we're talking about federal funding. So we encourage you to be involved at that level. Whether you can attend federal legislative day or not, there's opportunity always to reach out to federal legislators at the local level.
And I'm going to just jump in there and talk about stories for 1 second, Chris, before we move on, and say that part of our legislative day thrust for this year and next year is those stories. So if you are collecting stories, we encourage you to use your phone. So use your cell phone and tape somebody talking about what the library meant to them or means to them. Take a quick video. It doesn't have to be complicated. Use your phone. It really looks authentic if it's not professionally produced. So don't worry about the fact that you might not be able to professionally produce it. Send it to your library system director, please. Those stories, we'll collect those, and then we will be able to use those with other legislators, often in your same area. We can target those. So we really do want to make a concerted effort to collect those stories. So if you can do that to help us, we would greatly appreciate that, because we can use them, you can use them, and we can use them at a statewide level. So thank you for thinking about doing that.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about demonstrating the value of the library. The 3 bullet points on this slide represent a sample frame for library value. How something is presented to an audience influences the choices people make about how to process that information. After months of coping with a world turned upside down by pandemic, economic disruption, and other factors, it's understandable that you may be experiencing a degree of apprehension as to whether appreciation of your library's value has dimmed in the minds of local budget decision makers, whose heads are also crammed with so many other concerns. Making the effort to address relationships, knowing your audience as individuals, and learning local municipal views on the changed environment, as Pete suggested, will help you frame your library's value in this context. You don't have to agree with their frame for library services, but you do need to understand it so that your own frame speaks in positive ways to their interpretation and what's going on around them. And here I'd like to give Mark Eibach a chance to chime in here if he wants to. The two of us were used to doing tag team advocacy at some past New Directors Boot Camp presentations. So Mark, is there anything you want to add here?
No, I think you're covering it, Chris. Keep going.
All right. In that case, we'll move on in the interest of time.
And I guess that's me. So how do you implement? You've been given your village, your city has said you got to cut. How do you implement those cuts? First off, work with your staff. And I understand that for many of you, when you meet with your staff, you just have to look in a mirror because you're it. But talk to maybe some of your regular volunteers, 1 or 2 of your trustees. So identify, prioritize, what are your core services? What are your community's most important needs now? once you do that, develop several scenarios, several options for your board. Tell them, here's, we can do this, and here are the advantages, disadvantages of doing this. Maybe do 2 or 3 of these and take them to the board. Don't go to the board and say, well, here's the problem, what are we going to do? Develop because you're the leader. You're the expert. You're the one that's there every day. So go to them with some possibilities and recommendation if possible. So you engage the trustees, and then when you have to go to talk to your municipal board, your county, get those trustees along, get them engaged in presenting, explaining, and supporting this. Next slide, please. If you do have to cut hours or cut staff, make sure that you've shown we've cut other stuff before we had to do this important cut. We've cut all the little stuff we can. Communicate with your stakeholders, meaning your library board, your municipal board, your friends group if you have them. And be aware that cutting a budget and cutting expenditures are not quite the same. Cutting the budget is on paper. Cutting expenditures is what you're actually spending. So for example, if you have a standing order plan, you may need to readdress. You got to remember, if you cut that in the budget, you have to also cancel that plan. If you have staff who have responsibilities for spending certain things, that you tell them at the beginning of the year, you have X number of dollars to buy children's books. Make sure that you talk to them and that they realize that the budget has been cut and they don't have so much to spend as they thought they did. Next slide, please. And finally, for me, many of your libraries were founded in the early 1900s, some of them in the 1890s or 80s. There might even be a few older ones. In that time, your library has seen pandemics, epidemics, wars, depressions, recessions, civil unrest, all the things we're seeing now. Your library has been through floods, fires, tornadoes, you name it. Your library got through it. The library survived, and your library now will survive. I'm not saying it will be easy. It will be hard in many cases, but we together will all get through this. And next slide, please.
Well, as Mark said, this will pass, but while you're still dealing with the far-reaching effects of this pandemic, I'd like to encourage you to try to take advantage of the small silver lining that exists in crises like this. And it's hard to think about a crisis of this magnitude having a silver lining, but one thing that happens in times like this is that it shakes up the normal flow of life. We certainly all know that, and it wipes away expectations for the future. So think about that. It's wiping away the expectations of what the library is and what the library does. And this can be a time for you to look afresh at services before reinstating them. And once those expectations are gone, it sometimes becomes possible to do things that weren't possible before and easier to do things that were difficult before. So I have a list here, and I'm just going to really buzz through them because we do want to leave time. But you might not want to just open up, well, we're not opening up, you're not opening up, offering all of your services again. But you might want to take time to think, is there one that really just hasn't been great? It might have been popular with, 10 people. And this is your opportunity to make that one disappear. It's a time to revise job descriptions. You have probably discovered new things about your staff. You've certainly discovered new jobs that need to be done. This is a great time to do that. It may be the time to restructure your volunteer program. Do you need more volunteers? Do you need volunteers used in different ways? Do you need fewer? In some cases, you find that having volunteers is great for public relations, but not so great for efficiency, for getting things done, because sometimes they're gone all winter or something like that. I really feel that this might be a great time to start thinking about, at least, building future reserves, for future economic challenges. If your library isn't keeping reserves, or if your community has really criticized the size of the reserves of your library, I think the attitude about that may be changing. And so going forward, I would urge you to, at any point where it becomes appropriate, and that's not going to be this next year, but to say, and to use your reserves now in smart ways that you can point out in the future. And then if you do have reserves, to designate them so that your municipalities understand how they work. It's a time to change something about the way you personally work, and Connie, you can go to the next slide. I mean, that might be closed door time, that might be delegating other things. It's just, again, people's expectations have changed. I would urge you to create an ongoing advocacy plan if you haven't had one. And your friends group, if they've been shy about advocacy, maybe seeing more of a need for it now. So that might be an opportunity. Certainly a lot of goodwill has been generated by the services that libraries that were able to offer them, offered virtually and curbside service, and online connections with people. Work with those, strengthen those relationships. Look for other organizations in the community that have been innovative. Think about them as partners, and then think about what else you would like to change. And so if you can develop and maintain strong relationships, if you can think about being in this for the long haul, and if you can seize this opportunity for positive change, I think that you really have the ability to position your library for the post-pandemic sustainability. Oh, questions?
Yes, so we will be glad to entertain your questions. And feel free to use the Q&A in your toolbar to submit any questions. And somebody asked, can you provide an example of unintended consequences? The example of unintended consequences is if you go to your legislator and you say, we're being underfunded by the county because the state law only says they have to pay 70%. We really need to get that improved to 100% because the municipality is subsidizing the county. And that's so true. And you're exactly right about that. But if you get the ear of a legislator and that legislator then decides to change state law, then maybe they'll write a proposed law and introduce it and get co-sponsors to go to 100%. But the unintended consequence of that is you'll have other legislators who will say, oh, absolutely not. And it can become a place where a discussion happens where at the end of the day, they succeed in striking it from the statute altogether where there is no requirement of counties. So that would be a very negative unintended consequence because while we're trying to improve the rate, we ended up losing the statutory requirement that counties help reimburse municipalities for library use. We took great strides in getting that into statute because prior to that being in statute, counties didn't have an obligation to reimburse municipalities, and municipalities were, in many cases, providing that service free for no reimbursement whatsoever. So that's an example of an unintended consequence. So then there's another question here. It says, while every community county is different, but then it's cut off.
Yeah, Connie, and there was a second line to that in a second message. It says, can we expect some templates? And I sent a response to that person asking specifically if she was talking about or asking about templates for budget and cutting expenditures. I don't really know of any, because every community is different, and it's going to be what works for your library.
I recognize that name.
Okay.
And Vicki is a wonderful colleague of ours in WVLS, and I would encourage Vicki to get in touch with Marla or get in touch with me for more elaboration and conversation.
Great advice, Chris. I think there are a lot of negative things that are happening in our world, and even in our presentation today, we're trying to provide some hope, but not hope that's based on nothing. Hope that's based on knowing that we're all in this together, and that libraries matter, and that libraries matter to citizens, and so we need to take that long view. And the hope isn't pie in the sky. It's based on having goals that are not vague. It's like, I want a new job is a very vague goal, but a goal that actually means something is, I'm going to spend 1 hour a day working on my resume until I have it in a form that I can use. So that's a goal. So the not having pie in the sky goals, but having realistic goals, and having an action plan, and having people that support you, having trusted advisors, having the library systems that we have in the state. That structure is unique in the United States, and I think it's profoundly important and helpful, because those people are there to support you. So reach out to those people, use those people. They can engage in conversation with us, and we can provide hopefully some assistance to you if we need to do a targeted assistance. So the thing to remember is that you're not alone, and that you have WISPublib that you can send questions to, and you have colleagues, and I have seen such a wonderful response to people who ask questions on WISPublib, or even in the Facebook library page in that group. So you lean on each other, so that we aren't all out there fighting our own battles, that we have the ability to help and aid each other. And I will say to remember, as Mr. Rogers said, to look for the helpers. Right now, we're in a pandemic, we're in social unrest, we're in a very difficult time, and we should be looking for the helpers. And I would say that thank you to you. Each one of you is a helper. It's why we do what we do. Thank you for being a helper during these very difficult times. You have our greatest respect and admiration for the work that you're doing, and just keep doing it, and know that you can rely on others to help you get through this. Are there any other questions? If there aren't any other questions, please feel free to email questions to your system directors, who will reach out to us, and we'll attempt to get answers to those questions.
Connie, there was a question. Somebody asked if we can get my list of municipal finance discussion points as a document. I will say that that list of items is in the slides. So the slide presentation will be made available. And I can make sure that the last 2 bullet points that weren't on the original slide get included on that list.
Excellent. And I think that we're going to put together a resource document as well. Is that right, Kathy? Oh, can't hear you.
I was muted. There we go. Yes, Chris has been working on an advocacy document, and I hope to be able to listen to this recording and put together timestamps, a timestamp document for it, so that those of you that are in a hurry look at the slide deck and see a particular topic will know at what point to listen. I mean, we're fascinating, but an hour and a half is a long time for people.
Great.
So that may take a little bit longer, but I should be able to do that in the next few days.
And there were 4 slides on advocacy that we ditched for time reasons, but with the caveat that we'll bring them back as either as an attachment posted at the WLA website near where this is posted.
Right, and one of those is to do it was a really great helpful tool for doing an audit, an advocacy audit. So I'd encourage you all to do that. So do follow up with some of the additional information. Another was a link that didn't make it into this presentation, but it was a link to additional state funds that might be available for municipalities related to the pandemic. Many of you, I'm sure, already know that, but there might be some of you that don't. It's good to have that information so that in the event that you live in a very small village, your person, your administrator might not be aware of those, and you can be that source of information to help them capture some of those dollars. So that'll be part of that. And I want to make a reference to those categories that Pete provided, the different ways that municipalities are going to have potential reductions. Pete, you indicated in our conversation that came from the Wisconsin Policy Forum. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Right. So I would highly recommend that you all engage with or connect with Wisconsin Policy Forum. They're doing incredible research right now. So go to their website, go to their Facebook page, read their information. They're doing a lot of research on what is happening in municipalities. Fabulous organization. They've merged with Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance, so there's a wealth of information there that you should know about. When they post something on Facebook, I like it just because, well, I really like what they do because it's data, but I also do it for relationship building because I want those people to know we care as librarians. We care about quality information about the communities throughout the state of Wisconsin. And that's a relationship, small little relationship building thing. I also do like other legislators' posts when they post things that I think are helpful. It's hard. So Facebook right now, social media is somewhat toxic in many ways, but if you can find the points of light and you can add value, I would encourage you to do that because I think that people, legislators, citizens, everyone respects librarians, the information that we bring to the table, and that we care deeply about our communities. And I think that's something that we never want to forget is how connected we are with our communities and what value that is. So those are just some little tips. One other last little tip that I'll leave you with is I got one of my favorite newsletters is from a guy called an author named Eric Barker, B-A-R-K-E-R, and he has written a book called Barking Up the Wrong Tree. I subscribe to his newsletter, and he is very, very hopeful. If you want to have a very hopeful newsletter that you can read from time to time and doesn't overwhelm you with newsletters, but I got one a couple days ago, and it was about hope. And I just found it to be very helpful because it talks about setting realistic goals, thinking about the pathways to progress. And I can't recommend his newsletter strongly enough because he provides scientific research to base his newsletter and the things that he's saying. So Barking Up the Wrong Tree, I highly recommend. So anything else?
Yeah, well, Connie, on that hopeful note, I think this is maybe a time to close out the webinar. And I want to thank all the panelists for sharing their knowledge and experience. And I also want to thank all of you helpers for taking the time to attend the webinar today. I will follow up to send you an email that would have links to the recording and the slides And those will be available on the WLA website and the NUI website. The link, I'll also have a link to the evaluation form and a CE activity report form. And with that, I will stop the recording now and